Page 31. A high school love not forgotten. When they saw him walking across our high school campus, most students couldn't help but notice Bruce. Tall and lanky, he was a thinner replica of James Dean, his hair flipped back above his forehead and his eyebrows always cocked upward when he was in deep conversation. He was tender, thoughtful, and profound. He would never hurt anyone. I was scared of him. I was just breaking up with my not-so-smart boyfriend, the one you stayed with and went back to 30 times out of a bad habit, when Bruce headed me off at a campus pass one morning to walk with me. He helped me carry my books and made me laugh a dozen times with giddiness. I liked him. I really liked him. He scared me because he was brilliant, but in the end, I realized I was more scared of myself than of him. We started to walk together more at school. I would peer up at him from my stuffed locker, my heart beating rapidly, wondering if he would ever kiss me. We'd been seeing each other for several weeks, and he still hadn't tried to kiss me. Instead, he'd hold my hand, put his arm around me, and send me off with one of my books to class. When I opened it, a handwritten note in his highly stylized writing would be there, speaking of love and passion in a deeper sense than I could understand at 17. He would send me books, cards, notes, and would sit with me at my house for hours listening to music. He especially liked me to listen to the song "You Brought Some Joy Inside My Tears" by Stevie Wonder. At work one day, I received a card from him that said, "I miss you when I'm sad. I miss you when I'm lonely. But most of all, I miss you when I'm happy." I remember walking down the street of our small village, cars honking, the warm lights from stores beckoning strollers to come in from the cold, and all I could think about was, Bruce misses me most when he's happy. What a strange thing. I felt deeply uncomfortable to have such a romantic spirit by my side. A boy, really a man at 17, who thought his words out wisely, listened to every side of an argument, read poetry deep into the night, and weighed his decisions carefully. I sensed a deep sadness in him, but I couldn't understand it. Looking back, I now think the sadness stemmed from being a person who really didn't fit into the high school plan. Our relationship was so different from the one I'd had with my prior boyfriend. Our lives had been mostly movies and popcorn and gossip. We broke up routinely and dated other people. At times, it seemed like the whole campus was focused on the drama of our breakups, which were always intense and grand entertainment for our friends to discuss. A good soap opera. I talked to Bruce about these things, and with each story, he'd respond by putting his arm around me and telling me he'd wait while I sorted things out. And then he would read to me. He gave me the book The Little Prince, with the words underlined, "It's only in thy mind's eye that one can see rightly." In response, the only way I knew how, I wrote passionate letters of love and poetry to him, with an intensity I never knew before. But still, I kept my walls up, keeping him at bay because I was always afraid that he'd discover I was fake, not nearly as intelligent or as deep a thinker as I found him to be. I wanted the old habits of popcorn, movie, and gossip back. It was so much easier. I remember well the day when Bruce and I stood outside in the cold and I told him I was going back to my old boyfriend. "He needs me more," I said in my girlish voice. "Old habits die hard." Bruce looked at me with sadness, more for me than himself. He knew, and I knew then, I was making a mistake. Years went by. Bruce went off to college first, then I did. Every time I came home for Christmas, I looked him up and went over for a visit with him and his family. I always loved his family. The warm greetings they gave me when they ushered me into their house, always happy to see me. I knew just by the way his family behaved that Bruce had forgiven me for my mistake. One Christmas, Bruce said to me, "You were always a good writer. You were so good." "Yes," his mother nodded in agreement. "You wrote beautifully. I hope you'll never give up your writing." "But how do you know my writing?" I asked his mom. "Oh, Bruce shared all the letters you wrote him with me," she said. "He and I could never get over how beautiful you wrote." Then I saw his father's head nod too. I sank back in my chair and blushed deeply. What exactly had I written in those letters? I never knew Bruce had admired my writing as much as I had his intelligence. Over the years, we lost touch. The last I heard from his father, Bruce had gone off to San Francisco and was thinking about becoming a chef. I went through dozens of bad relationships until I finally married a wonderful man, also very smart. I was more mature by then and could handle my husband's intelligence, especially when he'd remind me I had my own. There's not one other boyfriend I ever think about with any interest, except for Bruce. Most of all, I hope he is happy. He deserves it. In many ways, I think he helped shape me, helped me learn how to accept the side of myself I refused to see amid movies, popcorn, and gossip. He taught me how to see my spirit and my writer inside. Diana L. Chapman. Section 2. On friendship. Some people come into our lives and quickly go. Some stay for a while and leave footprints on our hearts, and we are never, ever the same. Source unknown. Betty Ann. If you judge people, you have no time to love them. Mother Teresa. Mistakes. We all make them. Sometimes, if we're lucky, an eraser will do the trick, and we can rub it across the page, wipe away the dust, and all that's left of our careless mess is a hardly noticeable smudge. But some mistakes can't be erased, no matter how old or young we are. I was in the 9th grade the first time I really thought about all this. That year, I learned to diagram sentences on the blackboard, got my learner's permit, wore my first strapless bra, wrote poetry I never read to my parents. But by far, the toughest lesson I learned was that life doesn't come with erasers. I couldn't make something that had happened not happen. Even imagination is powerless. There are no erasers. I was 14, and I wish then, and I wish now, that I could erase or imagine away what I did, what we all did, to Betty Ann. She came to our school from Cleveland, Ohio, and to our 9th grade class in Richmond, Virginia. Cleveland was on another planet. "Oh, hi." Oh, whispered Margie under her breath as Mrs. Johnson introduced Betty Ann in homeroom that first day. Margie could be real snooty sometimes. Nobody took her too seriously when she got into a rich kid, old money mood. She'd entertain us with cruise stories and New York gossip every afternoon as we sat on the front steps after lunch, licking the icing off Oreos and begging quarters for a Dr. Pepper from the drink machine in the gym. Margie would try to impress us in her high-pitched, bragging voice with the Vogue models she knew and how they shampooed their hair with beer. The people who ate their whole dinner with their salad fork were not the kind of people her family wanted her to marry into. Actually, Margie was as insecure and as homely as the rest of us, and her life was about as exciting as the metric system, but we all knew Margie. We all knew everybody, except Betty Ann. Most of us had been in the same class since kindergarten. Then came Betty Ann of Cleveland in her peasant blouses, rolled-down socks, and strange ideas. If it had been just Margie who dug into Betty Ann, it wouldn't have turned out the way it did. She probably could have handled it, but we all were in on it. I guess what started us off was when Betty Ann wrote a better English composition than Susan Henderson. Susan was the writer of the class, and we were very proud of her. Her weekly story was always so good. Miss Moon usually chose it to read aloud to the class every Friday. Susan would sit back in her desk, a pencil stuck behind her ear, looking to all of us just like a promising young literary genius we could say we once knew. The Friday after Betty Ann arrived on the scene, Susan twirled her pencil, leaned back in her desk, and waited for the best composition of the week to be read. Hers, of course. Only it wasn't. It was Betty Ann's, and it was about a black poet named Langston Hughes and how he had become a spokesman for his people. Susan's stories were always about horse shows or opening nights. We'd never heard of Langston Hughes. Besides, this was an all-white private school. Martin Luther King was being nailed by most of the adults we knew. All in all, it was a real bomb to have Betty Ann go on about Langston Hughes's black nativity and his description of the maple sugar child and how he thought Carl Sandburg's poems fall on the page like blood clots of song from the wounds of humanity. In Susan's stories, the telephone jangled and the rainbow painted the sky. Stuff like that. Betty Ann was writing about the Civil War in Spain and the black ghetto of Harlem. Langston Hughes was from Cleveland. We might have guessed. Mrs. Johnson came to the part in Betty Ann's composition where Langston Hughes writes a poem about how he likes watermelon so much that if he should meet the Queen of England, he'd be proud to offer her a piece. That was when Agnes Matherson's eyes caught mine, or was it the other way around? And we started imitating the Queen of England eating a piece of watermelon. The whole class burst out laughing. The rest of the story was never read, and everybody but Betty Ann had to stay after school and clean blackboards. The next day at lunch, Betty Ann found a note under her lettuce saying we were sorry, but the cafeteria was sure enough out of watermelon. After that, she became the class joke. What she wore, what she said, what she ate somehow gave one of us an idea for a wisecrack. There was a kind of one-upmanship about getting Betty Ann that had less to do with Betty Ann than with our own jungle mentality. I know that now, but I didn't think about it then. She became a pawn. She started getting sick a lot. There'd be whole weeks when she'd miss school, but the Betty Ann stories went on even without her. She came to our school from another planet. She was our little moron, our Pollock, our village idiot. Then one day, Betty and Ann and I were assigned a project together. Everyone had selected a partner, and I was out of town at a school swimming meet that day, the day the assignment was given, so I got stuck with Betty Ann. Everyone kidded me, and I laughed with them. The day before the project was due, I had to go over to her house after school to work on it with her. Her mother fixed a plate of cookies and kept coming into the room to see if I wanted more Coke or anything. She said I was the only one of Betty Ann's friends who had come over after school, and she was glad to meet me. The phone rang while I was there, and it was for me. Betty Ann's mother was in the kitchen when I heard Margie giggling at the other end of the line. "Have you eaten any maple sugar candy or watermelon, kiddo?" She waited for me to snicker an undercover laugh. I saw Betty Ann's mother just standing in the kitchen with her back to me, pretending not to be listening. It was as if she had heard everything. I hung up. I think it was at that moment when I began to see what we had been doing. "Why don't you girls like Betty Ann?" "She likes you." Nobody had ever asked me a question before or since that made me feel so stupid. If kindness could kill, Betty Ann would have been dead in a week, but it was too late. Her parents moved her to another school. Then we heard later that she'd had a nervous breakdown. Once, years later, when I was home from college, I saw Betty Ann in the doctor's office. She didn't even recognize me. Sticks and stones only break bones. Words can shatter the soul. A little, quiet, picked-on 10-year-old runs away because kids on the bus laugh at him. A sensitive ninth grader flips out because a group of self-rising girls decide to throw her to the wolves. We tell ourselves it takes more than that to send someone over the edge. Maybe so, maybe not, but there are no erasers. Ina Hewson. Hi, that's today's reading. Have a good day. We'll talk to you later. Don't forget to fill out the form. Bye.